Are the Nottinghamshire constituents of Ashfield being robbed and hoodwinked out of a by-election by the Reform UK Party and their so-called new MP, Lee Anderson?
You could say Robin hoodwinked. Charlotte Nichols fed me that line just before the news, so if you don't find it funny, blame her. Right, let's go to Harriet Baldwin. Are you bereft at the loss of your colleague?
I think everyone is always sad when these things happen, and if you remember, he had the whip withdrawn, and he had the whip withdrawn in circumstances where even he admitted he could see that the chief whip had to withdraw the whip. I think colleagues had been hoping that he would be able to apologise, that he'd be able to find a way back into our party, but he's chosen this morning to join Reform. And interestingly, I know that, the media have had a bit of a field day with some of his past comments today, because he was a supporter of the private members bill that would have forced someone who changes party to actually trigger a by-election. And I think, if that were to have happened, it would have been in line with his previously expressed views. My own view is that, a vote for Reform is a vote to usher in a Labour government, something obviously that as a Conservative I do not want to see. So perhaps that is what Lee is seeking. He was once a Labour member, I understand. But, I think it is very much the case that it's a sad day for the Parliamentary Party, because I know he was friends with many colleagues.
Zoe Garbutt.
I think the comments that Lee Anderson have made are horrific, and I'd like to ask Harriet if you'd forgive what he'd said, or if you think that the comments made about Sadiq Khan.
No, I think we can safely say the comments he made were completely unacceptable.
Great. It's really good to hear you say that. And I think that, what we're seeing out of the main party around this culture of bigotry and hatred and war, culture wars is incredibly scary and disappointing, and fueling a lot of what we're seeing out in the communities and people feeling incredibly unsafe. And I just think it's remarkable that, if we think back to when you were elected, Harriet, in 2010, would we have seen someone moving from the main party, from the mainstream Conservative Party, into, say, the BNP at that time? And I think this move is incredibly scary. And I don't know what I'd say about
Reform UK to the BNP.
I think it's this extreme right parties, isn't it? And MPs moving just further and further to the right, and it just seeing more and more acceptable.
I think actually it's really important not to stray into that particular dead end. I think what people want is they do want to see control over the borders. Of course they do. And of course, I think by voting Reform and heralding in potentially a Labour government, you would reduce the chances of both having control over immigration in this country, because Labour have voted against every single one of the measures that we brought into to control illegal migration. And I think that by and large, when I speak to people who are sympathetic to Reform, that is one of the things that they're trying to express.
I think what we do here is a lot of hatred, and I think that it's fueling a lot of the way that it's really isolating a lot of our communities and really pushing people into really desperate situations. And I think that's incredibly worrying and scary. And I think what we need to see, I know the question was about by-elections, but I think what we need to see is a total election to sweep out the current kind of government.
Well, you're going to get that soon, but should there be a by-election now?
I think there should be an election now. I think we need to see...
Should there be a by-election now? That was the question.
I think, obviously, we've spoken about the rules in Parliament around people switching parties, but I think it obviously is interesting to hear that people are, not happy with their representation and the party that Anderson has chosen to move to.
Charlotte.
Frankly, I think Lee Anderson is a tenner-penny pub bore. And I find it staggering that he's set himself up as this authentic voice of the Red Wall, which was always a nonsense and offensive to people in constituencies like mine that are also in the Red Wall, that don't parrot the kind of lazy bigotry that he does. I think his comments about Sadiq Khan were appalling. I think they're Islamophobic, and I think the Conservative Party were right to remove the whip. But he's a man that is only interested in his own career. This is a step that he's taken a few months after saying that Reform had offered him £400,000 to move over to the party, and he's saying that he'd rejected that. Suddenly he's coming into Reform and talking about how fantastic they are this morning. He's more interested in his paymasters in GB News and now in Reform than he ever was with his constituents. And I think, frankly, it's time for a general election rather than just a by-election.
But do you think there should be a by-election?
Ideally, but I mean, we've had that many by-elections in this parliament that I think it's time that there's a clean sweep and we go back to the country and try to get some serious politicians who are interested in representing the constituents they seek to serve and not just whipping up culture wars nonsense.
No, I want to hear from Natasha first.
Well, it struck me that Zoe referenced people feeling unsafe, and it seems striking that we may be losing sight of what it was that prompted these unfortunate remarks, which is the fact that people have been feeling unsafe on the streets of London, that we've seen week after week pro-Hamas, pro-terror marches with the Metropolitan Police seemingly completely unable to police them properly, and that since the Metropolitan Police has failed in that, we've also seen...
I've got to pick you up from that, because clearly there are people who support Hamas on those marches, but they're actually organised by the Free Palestine movement, which is rather different from how you described it.
Well, the fact that you have people on these marches organised, including by the PSC, calling for genocide, essentially, which is what From the River to the Sea stands for, that you have clear support for Hamas being voiced, because these started, let's not forget, immediately after the 7th of October. Right. So this is critical because it's what prompted it. And the fact that ordinary Londoners, as well as others around the UK, have seen this happening week after week on the streets, and the police completely ineffective. And then on top of that, we haven't seen anything...
What do you mean the police are ineffective?
Well, they haven't been enforcing the law. Basic provisions of the Public Order Act, of the Terrorism Act, haven't been enforced. And we've seen over the last 5 months examples I would identify as clearly in breach. We've seen calls for jihad, we've seen calls for intifada. I mean, here in the UK, we've seen what intifada looks like on the 7/7 bombings.
We're going completely off the subject.
We are.
Let's get back on it.
Well, no, but this is the very point, because this chaos and this debate that has erupted has completely distracted from the instigation of the remarks that were made and the calling out of the failure of both the Metropolitan Police and the Mayor of London. The Metropolitan
But he called Sadiq, he said that, or alleged that Sadiq Khan was being controlled by Islamists.
I think we all are agreeing that the remarks that were made are extremely unfortunate, not least because they have completely distracted from the issue, which I think anyone who heard the remarks in the context of which it was the failure to do anything about the London marches in particular, it would be clear. So the fact that this debate has moved so significantly, and now we're looking at a possible debate about a by-election so close to a general election in a situation of real chaos, I mean, that's completely shifted the argument.
Okay. Well, let's introduce another text question to this from Carolina. A few Conservative MPs have made several concerning statements indicating extreme views, e.g. 30p Lee, Truss, Braverman, etc. In addition, an article today revealed Tory donor Frank Hester had made some disgusting statements about women of colour, including Diane Abbott. If the Conservative Party is so concerned with extremism, shouldn't Rishi Sunak get his own house in order first? Now, just a bit of background to this. The Guardian has revealed that Frank Hester, who's given The Guardian has revealed that healthcare technology entrepreneur Frank Hester, who's given the Tories £10 million in the past year, said at a meeting in 2019 that, and this is a quote from him apparently, "You see Diane Abbott on the TV and you're just like, you just want to hate all black women because she's there. And I don't hate all black women at all, but I think she should be shot."
Oh,
horrific.
God.
I mean, the mind boggles. A Conservative spokesman has told LBC that Mr Hester has made clear that while he was rude, his criticism had nothing to do with her gender nor the colour of her skin. He has since apologised.
I mean, that's just grim. Shocking, that's just absolutely grim. And I think one point of consensus that you'll find across this panel this evening, for all of us who are active in frontline politics, is I think it's incumbent upon us all to, particularly during a time where there's such a lot of international tension, not to inflame any. Just not to incite violence in that way. I mean, it's just appalling, and seems to have surfaced after he said it in 2019. So you just wonder why it wasn't surfaced nearer the time. I mean, that is just absolutely horrendous and appalling.
Natasha?
Well, you wonder, especially in the context of, women, why anyone would want to enter the political field in that context. And my hat goes off to my fellow panellists for being brave enough to take that on.
It's not too late, Natasha.
Yeah, you'd be very welcome.
Charlotte?
I think it's staggering, really. And Diane is an incredible MP, has been an MP for 40 years, and she receives over half of the abuse that's sent to all MPs individually. Now, I know how difficult it is, and, other women MPs in particular will know how difficult it is dealing with some of the abuse that we get every week. And Diane gets half of what all MPs get herself. That is the context in which these remarks have been made, and I think it's important that we don't step aside from that fact. It's very difficult to see how you could say that those comments have nothing to do with her race or her gender, where I think they're explicitly anti-black and misogynist. And I think this goes back to the point that I'd said earlier about the comments made by Lee Anderson being Islamophobic, because it's very easy for Conservatives who did the media round afterwards to say that they were unacceptable, but they couldn't even name why they're unacceptable. They would say, it's wrong, but they can't say why they're wrong or why they wouldn't say it.
I suspect they will now.
But I think that if we can't even name what these things are, then how are we meant to deal with these bigotries, whether it's misogyny, whether it's anti-Semitism, whether it's Islamophobia, whether it's anti-black racism? If we can't even call these things what they are, we have no chance of dealing with them. And I think, the caller is absolutely right. I think the government should get their own house in order on this, because we in Parliament should be setting an example to the rest of the country, not playing to some of those basest instincts that exist within certain sections of society.
Sorry.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's incredibly dangerous for Rishi Sunak to be making statements about his view on extremist comments when so much of that is coming from Parliament and his own government. We hear from lots of residents who feel incredibly unsafe. The LGBTIK plus community, trans residents, as well as Muslim and black community, who feel incredibly unsafe because of the comments that come out from elected officials. And I agree. I think that it is incredibly difficult to put yourself forward. I've taken the Jo Cox Foundation pledge around making sure that politics is free from abuse and harassment, and just making sure it's a safe space. But people need to know that their representatives are keeping themselves and got compassion and solidarity at their heart.
And I think that morning after George Galloway was elected, I thought the speech that Rishi Sunak made on the steps of Downing Street really got the tone right in terms of what we need to value in our democracy, but also the kinds of things that we do need to call out.
Well, could he not call out Mr Hester and return the millions of pounds of donations that he's donated to the Conservative Party, saying we don't wish to be associated with people like this?
I will encourage him to look into the matter.
I think that's clear, because we make sure that we only take money from, we're mainly funded by our supporters and our members, because we make sure that we're only taking money from people who are completely in line with our values, and we're not kind of funded by big business, or our values and our policies aren't swayed in that way.